The briefing room was built to intimidate. Polished marble floors reflected the harsh white ceiling lights, and the long glass table cut the space in half like a blade. Flags stood perfectly still along the walls. No drafts, no noise, no comfort. This was where careers stalled, where decisions were made that never reached paper, where silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. She stood at the far end of the table, hands clasped behind her back, posture flawless. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed so sharply it looked unreal against the sterile room. No medals drawn attention, no unnecessary decoration, just rank, restraint, and control. Admiral Garrett Hayes paced in front of her like a predator that had already decided the outcome. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose authority had never been meaningfully questioned. His dress uniform gleamed with rows of ribbons earned more through command than combat, and every step echo, deliberate, loud, demanding acknowledgement. "You will address me correctly," Hayes snapped, stopping inches from her face, "or you will not address me at all." Several officers stood along the walls, eyes forward, spines stiff. No one breathed too loudly. No one intervened. They had learned over years exactly how far Admiral Hayes was allowed to go. She met his gaze calmly, not defiant, not submissive, just level. "With respect, sir," she said evenly, "the data you're presenting is incomplete." The word respect seemed to detonate something behind Hayes' eyes. "Incomplete," he repeated, voice rising. "You're questioning my briefing. I'm correcting it." That was the moment the room shifted, a subtle thing, felt more than heard. One officer swallowed hard. Another shifted his weight. Everyone understood that she had crossed an invisible line, one that existed only for men like Hayes. He leaned closer, breath sharp with anger. "You forget your place." "No, sir," she replied. "I know exactly where it is." The punch came without warning, no shouted order, no raised voice, just a sudden, violent movement, his fist snapping forward and connecting with her jaw. The sound was sharp, sickening, completely out of place in such a controlled environment. Papers fluttered off the table. Somewhere, a chair scraped softly against the floor. For a fraction of a second, time froze. Everyone expected her to fall. She didn't. Her head turned slightly with the impact, just enough to absorb it. Her feet never moved. She didn't stumble, didn't reach for her face, didn't even inhale sharply. The room waited for the aftermath, a cry, a collapse, outrage, something. Instead, she slowly turned her head back toward him and smiled, not a wide smile, not mocking, just a small, precise curve of the lips that sent a chill through the room. It was the kind of smile someone wears when a calculation has just finished running. Admiral Hayes felt it before he understood it. A faint sting in his knuckles, a strange hollowness in his chest, like he'd just stepped too close to the edge of something deep. "You struck me," she said calmly, voice steady, almost conversational. "You were insubordinate." Hayes growled, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. "You embarrassed me." She straightened her uniform with one smooth motion, fingers adjusting a collar that hadn't even shifted. "You violated protocol," in front of witnesses. His bodyguards, stationed near the door, finally reacted. Boots shifted, hands moved. Training kicked in, a second too late. What none of them knew, what no personnel file revealed, was that the woman standing before them hadn't spent the last 8 years behind briefing tables and classified screens. She hadn't survived on rank alone. She had been trained in rooms with no windows, under instructors whose names never appeared in records. She'd learned to read movement before it happened, to measure threat by breath and balance, to end fights before observers could describe them. Admiral Hayes drew himself up, towering over her again, unaware that the moment he'd thrown that punch, he'd surrendered control of the room. "You think this ends well for you?" he said. "You think anyone here will take your side?" She glanced around, not at the officers, not at the flags, but at the security cameras tucked discreetly into the corners. Then her eyes returned to Hayes. "No," she said softly, "I think this ends quickly." The room went utterly silent. And in that silence, just before the bodyguards took their second step forward, Admiral Garrett Hayes realized, far too late, that he hadn't just struck a subordinate, he had made a catastrophic mistake. By the time Admiral Hayes finished his last word, the room had already moved on without him. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was tight, stretched thin, like a wire pulled to its limit. Every officer along the wall felt it. Years of training told them to act, to intervene, to restore order. Years of experience told them not to. Something had shifted, and none of them could name it without admitting fear. The bodyguards took their second step. That was all the time she needed. Her smile vanished, not replaced by anger, not by rage, but by focus. Pure, cold clarity. The kind that stripped away hesitation and left only intent. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, just enough to realign her body, just enough to bring Hayes off center. He didn't even realize he'd lost his balance until it was gone. Her left elbow came up, not swung, not forced, placed. It struck beneath his ribcage with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs in a soundless gasp. Hayes folded instinctively, shock registering before pain. His mind scrambled for authority, for outrage, for commands, but his body was already behind. Before gravity could finish the job, her right hand snapped to the side of his neck. 2 fingers, 1 point. There was no dramatic blow, no visible violence, just a brief, exact press behind the ear at a location no standard combat manual mentioned. Hayes' eyes widened, not in pain but in confusion, as his nervous system betrayed him. His legs gave out like a power switch had been flipped. He hit the marble floor hard. The sound echoed. The bodyguards froze, weapons half drawn, hands hovering, training screaming at them to neutralize the threat. But the threat was standing perfectly still, breathing evenly, eyes forward. And the Admiral they were sworn to protect lay unconscious at her feet, face turned to the side, chest rising shallowly. No one moved. She stepped back once, deliberately creating space, not fleeing. Not retreating, establishing control. "Stand down," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The command carried weight not from rank, but from certainty. The bodyguards exchanged a split-second glance, long enough to confirm what both already knew. If she wanted them down, they would already be on the floor. Slowly, they lowered their hands. Around the room, officers stared in disbelief. Some looked at Hayes, some at her, some at the floor, as if eye contact might make them complicit. A captain near the wall felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He had watched men twice her size fail hand drills she'd clearly mastered beyond doctrine. She adjusted her sleeves again, habit, control. No tremor in her hands. "I am invoking Article 17, she said calmly. "This room is now secured." One officer finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I defended myself," she replied without turning. Against an unprovoked assault by a superior officer, the words landed like weights. She walked to the far end of the table and pressed a single button embedded beneath the glass surface. A soft tone sounded. Red indicator lights blinked on above the doors. Lockdown. The realization hit the room all at once. Someone had just overridden Pentagon level security protocols and done it without hesitation. Medical assistance will be required, she continued, glancing briefly at Hayes' still form. But not immediately. He's stable. One of the bodyguards swallowed. "Who are you?" She paused at that. For the first time since the punch, she looked almost amused. "You don't have clearance," she said. The room's screens flickered to life without anyone touching them. A secure channel opened. Lines of encrypted text scrolled briefly before resolving into a single identifier redacted, compartmentalized, unmistakably above anything present in the room. Every officer who saw it felt their stomach drop. Somewhere far above them, alarms had begun to ring. Not audible, not dramatic, but far more dangerous. Systems flagging anomalies. Command chains activating. People who never attended briefings suddenly paying very close attention. She folded her hands behind her back once more, resuming the posture she'd held when the meeting began. "Remain where you are," she said calmly. "And consider very carefully what you say next." No one spoke, because now they understood. This wasn't an outburst. This wasn't insubordination. This was containment, and Admiral Garrett Hayes was no longer the most powerful person in the room. No one spoke for several seconds after the screens went dark. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the ventilation system and the faint, uneven breathing of Admiral Garrett Hayes on the floor. His chest rose and fell, slow and shallow. The unconscious body of a man who had believed power made him untouchable. The woman didn't look at him again. She stood exactly where she'd always stood, at the end of the table, spine straight, expression neutral, hands clasped behind her back. The same posture she'd held before the punch, before the silence, before everything changed. But now the room belonged to her. One of the senior captains finally broke protocol and shifted his gaze. His eyes moved from the fallen admiral to the red, lit doors, then back to her. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Ma'am," he said carefully, choosing every syllable like a live round, "Central Command will want an explanation." She nodded once. "They already have one." As if on cue, the far wall display flickered to life again, this time not with identifiers, but with a live, secure feed. The seal that appeared made several officers stiffen instantly. This wasn't Fleet Command. This wasn't even Pentagon oversight. This was higher. A voice came through the speakers, calm, controlled, unmistakably accustomed to obedience. "Status report." She didn't turn toward the screen. She didn't need to. Admiral Garrett Hayes initiated physical contact in violation of protocol. She said evenly, "Threat neutralized, situation contained, no additional force required." There was a brief pause. Not hesitation, verification. "Any casualties?" "No." Another pause, shorter this time. "Medical team is en route." "Approved." The feed cut. The bodyguards exhaled almost in unison, tension draining from their shoulders like air from a punctured seal. One of them finally knelt beside Hayes, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. It was steady, strong, embarrassingly human. The captain near the wall cleared his throat. "Ma'am, permission to ask a question." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Why didn't this appear in your service record?" A faint smile touched her lips, not the dangerous one from earlier, but something quieter, older, because it wasn't meant to. She stepped forward for the first time since the takedown, heels clicking softly against the marble. As she passed the unconscious admiral, she didn't look down, but the room did. They saw him differently now, smaller, stripped of the myth that had protected him. She stopped beside the table and placed a small object on its surface. A thin, black case, no markings, no insignia. "I was assigned here as an observer," she said. "This briefing was meant to test compliance, not data accuracy." Several officers stiffened. "You failed," she added calmly. The weight of that sentence settled heavily across the room. One lieutenant swallowed. "Sir, Mum, I mean, what happens now?" She turned, meeting his eyes directly. There was no cruelty there, no satisfaction. "Just resolve. Now," she said, "this incident is documented exactly as it occurred. Witness statements will be collected, footage will be reviewed, and Admiral Hayes will answer questions he has avoided his entire career. And you," the captain asked. She paused. "For me," she said, "this assignment ends." The red lights above the doors flicked to green. Locks disengaged with a soft, mechanical click. Somewhere down the corridor, hurried footsteps approached. Medical personnel, security teams, people whose authority usually commanded rooms like this. She adjusted her uniform one last time, smoothing a sleeve that still didn't need it. As the doors opened and voices flooded in, no one stopped her as she walked past. Not security, not command, not a single officer who, minutes earlier, wouldn't have dared meet her eyes. She passed through the doorway without looking back. Behind her, Admiral Garrett Hayes groaned faintly as consciousness began to return, confused, disoriented, stripped of certainty. He would wake to questions, to investigations, to a world that no longer bent around his temper. Ahead of her, the corridor stretched long and bright, just another hallway in a building full of them. She walked it calmly, because for people like her, violence wasn't the point, control was, and today she had demonstrated it perfectly.